Creating these classes requires equipment and services that cost money. If you appreciate this education, please think about going to elithecomputerguy.com and offering a one-time or monthly recurring donation. Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli, the computer guy, and in today's class, we're going to be going over stored procedures within MySQL databases. So essentially, all a stored procedure is a way of referencing a pre-written SQL statement. So as we've gone on in these classes, our SQL statements have become more and more complex. So in the beginning, you start with, select all from whatever table, and you get the results. Then you start doing select, name and something else, some other column from table, and then you get the results. And then you do select blah, blah, blah from a table, inner join on, where, order by, the whole 9 yards. And essentially at the end of the day, you can get very, very, very complex SQL statements that become very difficult to type out every time you want a certain result. So wouldn't it be nice if essentially you could write that big old nasty SQL statement once and then be able to call that as a procedure in the future. So instead of having to type out, select blah, blah, blah from where, order by, the whole 9 yards, essentially all you could do is you could say call nasty procedure, and then calling that nasty procedure will then actually send that entire SQL statement that it's referencing to your MySQL database, and then you will get the results out. So when we're talking about stored procedures, that's all we're doing. Essentially what we're doing is we are writing a script in the MySQL world. So again, if you're thinking about if you're using Windows, if you're using Linux, again, you're using any other kind of scripting language, basically you can write out a whole long script and then be able to call that script using a simple name. That's what you're able to do with a stored procedure within a MySQL database. What you're able to do is you're able to write out a long, nasty SQL statement, and then you're able to call that SQL statement using simply the name of that stored procedure. So what we're going to be going over today is stored procedures. They are very, very useful to use and surprisingly easy to set up. Now we do have to do a little bit of a warning, Will Robinson, warning. There's one thing that I'm going to show you today that could really screw you up for your MySQL database. Most of what I'm going to show you today, if you fat finger it or if you do something stupid, it will either error out, or the worst case scenario, you just get a really nasty procedure that you have to delete. But there is one thing here. If you're not paying attention, it could really make your life a nightmare trying to use your MySQL database server going into the future. And that is setting the delimiter. So what do I mean by setting the delimiter? So currently you have a delimiter of a semicolon, right? So whenever you do, select all from table, in order to get that statement to run, you have to use the delimiter of a semicolon. So the default delimiter within MySQL is the semicolon. So you write out the statement, you hit semicolon, and then that statement runs. And so that can be a real pain in the butt if you don't realize that delimiter is required, where you can write out a statement, and if you don't use a semicolon, if you hit enter, all you get is that weird little arrow thing, and nothing actually runs, nothing actually really happens. So you have to put that little semicolon in there as the delimiter that will then have the SQL statement run. Well, one of the interesting things is when you're creating stored procedures, when you create the stored procedure, you have to type in the semicolon and hit enter to go to the next line without what you created actually running while you're creating it. It becomes a bit of a mess. Basically, what happens with MySQL is whenever it sees that delimiter, so if it's a semicolon, as soon as it sees it and you hit enter, it will try to run whatever it is that you've given it, even if you're trying to create a stored procedure, which basically creates a mess. So what we're going to do is you're able to use a command delimiter. So you use a command delimiter, and by using the command delimiter, you can change the delimiter that is being used. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the delimiter. So we're going to say delimiter space $. So what that will do is that will change the delimiter from being a semicolon to a $. So basically whatever we type in will not run until we type in $, and then hit enter. So why that's important is we're going to create the procedure. Within the procedure that we're creating, there will be semicolons. But before we've created the procedure, we will change the delimiter to $. So when MySQL sees the semicolons and reads the enter, while the delimiter is still $, nothing bad will happen. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to do delimiter, $. We are going to create our procedure with our semicolons in there, but it won't be any big deal because basically the MySQL will not be processing when it sees semicolons because the delimiter will now be $. We'll get to the end. When we get to the end, we'll do $. So that will then create the procedure for us. And then after that, the next thing that you're going to do is do delimiter space semicolon to reset the delimiter back to being a semicolon. If you set the delimiter to some weird ass, who the hell knows what, remember that your MySQL database server will not process SQL statements until it sees that delimiter. So if you change the delimiters to something else, and then you do not change it back to a semicolon, then you can run into problems later when you go to type in SQL statements normally, and you will run into issues there. So that's just the big thing just to keep in mind is we will be changing the delimiter here. So we'll be changing the delimiter from semicolon to $, in order to create the procedure. As soon as we are done creating the procedure, we will set the delimiter back to semicolon so that we don't run into problems in the future and so that we can then run the SQL statements as we have been doing in the past, simply using that semicolon as the end. So with that, let's go over to the computer to show you how this works. So here we are back at my MacBook Pro. Again, I have VirtualBox running. Within VirtualBox, we have an instance of Ubuntu Desktop 18.04 LTS. Within this Ubuntu Desktop, I use TaskCell to install the LAMP stack. So this has Apache, MySQL, and PHP. So that's the lab environment that we're going to be dealing with. And so we're going to go down here. We're going to click on the Show Applications. Then you go up to Search. And from here, you type in terminal to get you to the command prompt. From this point, we are now going to log into our MySQL database server. If you do not have a user account created yet, within your MySQL database server, you can use sudo MySQL. This will log you in as the root level account, but we created user accounts before, so we are going to do MySQL space -u, username, Bob space -p to ask for the password. We put in a password of 123456. And now we hit enter, and we are now in our MySQL database. From here, database server. From here, we can do show databases. This will show us the databases on this particular server, and we can see we have the normal databases, and then we have the class database. That is the one that we are concerned about. So we will do use class DB. That will get us into the class database, and we will use the semicolon. So as I talked about before, the semicolon is currently the delimiter. When you type semicolon and then you hit enter, that then tells MySQL to run the statement that you've put in there. And so we're going to hit that and hit enter, and our database has changed. From here, what we're going to do is we are then going to do show tables. So I want to see the tables within this particular database, semicolon as the delimiter. And we can see we have a parts table and we have a vendors table. So normally what you would do is you would do like select all from parts. So this is a SQL statement. So this will select all the columns, from the parts table. We hit enter, and then we can see, okay, so we've got part ID, part name, part price, vendor ID, cog, rod, sprocket. We can see the price. We can see all of that information there. So now what if we wanted to create a stored procedure? So instead of having to do select all from parts, we could simply call a stored procedure. What we're going to do is we're going to clear the screen. And so now, in order to create a stored procedure, the first thing that we need to do is we need to change the delimiter. So we're going to do delimiter, and then we're going to say $. So the delimiter is no longer going to be the semicolon after this. So I hit enter. And so now, if I do, let's say, select all from parts, now at the end of this, I need to put $, in order for that to run. If I hit enter, it now runs. If I simply do select all from parts, as I did before, but I do semicolon. Remember, semicolon is no longer the delimiter since I changed the delimiter up here. So when I hit enter now, it's just going to give me that stupid little arrow thing until I do $, because that's the true delimiter. At that point, it will now actually process the SQL statement. So that's one of the reasons it's very important that when you are done, you put the delimiter back to being the semicolon or whatever it is that you want. So anyways, let's clear the screen again. So the delimiter is now $$. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the procedure. So we're going to create procedure. And so then we need to give the procedure a name. So let's say test P. So we'll just call it test P, open parentheses, close parentheses. Then we're going to hit enter. And then the first thing that we have to do is we have to type in begin. So we're going to say we are beginning what this stored procedure is. Then we'll just hit enter again, just to put this on another line. Theoretically, all of this could be on one single line. I am simply doing this to make it a little bit easier to read. And then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to do select all from parts, and then do the semicolon. So basically we're saying create the procedure, and then we're giving the procedure a name, open parentheses, close parentheses. Then we're going to say begin. And then here, this is where we put in our SQL statement, however long or short it may be. And then we do semicolon. Now, since the semicolon is no longer the delimiter, when I hit enter, there will not be any issues. Now, if you had not modified the delimiter, as soon as I had that semicolon and as soon as I press enter, then MySQL would try to run what I had just typed in, and then you will get some kind of Frankenstein mess out of it. So that's why we changed the delimiter. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say end. So we're going to end. So begin, then we have whatever's in the middle, and then we're going to end. And now to say that this is finished, we are going to do $$. So this is the new delimiter. So this says to MySQL, process all of this as soon as I press enter. Then I hit enter, I get no errors. The first thing that I do is I change my delimiter back to being a semicolon. So delimiter space semicolon. And then from here, now all I have to do is call the procedure. So I do call, and then I do test P, and then I do semicolon. And then now I get the same results, right? So basically, instead of having to type out the entire SQL statement like I did before, I could simply type in call test P, and this SQL statement will run. So with that, let's do something a little bit more complicated. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a join, right? So before, in one of our previous classes, I joined the parts table to the vendors table based off of vendor ID. Again, so that gets a little bit longer. So let's actually try to create that as a procedure just to give you an idea of why you would use these procedures for longer SQL statements. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set the delimiter to $$ again. And then from here, what we're going to do is we are going to create procedure, and then we're going to call it nasty. We're just going to call it nasty procedure, right? And then open parentheses, close parentheses. Now we're going to go down and we're going to say begin. And then we're going to go down one more level. And then now this is where I'm going to type in a little bit more of a nasty SQL statement. This isn't the nastiest. You can get really nasty SQL statements. But just to give you an idea. So let's say we're going to do select. We're still going to do all from parts, inner join vendors. On. And then we have to say what we're inner joining on. And so we're going to do parts. Dot vendor underscore ID equals vendors dot vendor underscore ID, and then semicolon. So we're going to select all. So we're going to select all columns from the parts table inner joined to the vendors table on. So parts dot vendor ID. So there's a column within the parts table called vendor ID, and then that will equal in the vendors table, there's a column called vendor ID, right? So this will combine those two together. Then we're going to go down one more level. We're going to do end. And then we're going to do $, and hopefully if I didn't do something stupid, this will work. So we hit enter, okay, query okay, we have no errors. So now all I can do, instead of having to type out all of this or something even more complicated, what I can do is I can say call nasty, then I do almost made a mistake, delimiter goes back to being a semicolon. So now that the delimiter is now back to being a semicolon, what I can do is I can do call, and then I can do nasty, then I do semicolon, and then look, I get that joined statement that I had created up there. And so now, if this was a statement that I would have to run periodically, instead of having to type all of this in and worrying about fat fingering it or doing something stupid, I can simply type in call nasty now, and that will get me the exact same results. So again, with these SQL statements, these could be really long. You could say select, part name, part price, vendor name, vendor address, from parts, inner join, vendors on, blah, 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 where, maybe you could say, part price is greater than, 5, order by, maybe vendor name, right? You can make this really long and tedious. You type that in once, you give it a procedure name, and then you can simply call that procedure in the future without having to type everything in. So with that, let's clear the screen again. And now what we need to look at is we need to see what procedures do we have within this particular database. So again, you're coming into a database, we do show databases. So when we log into the MySQL server, we do show databases to show us what databases we have on the server. We go and we do use whatever database we want to go into. So we go into a database and we do show tables to see what tables are in the database. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to see what procedures are in this particular database, right? So in order to do that, what we do is we do show procedure status where, and then we do DB, so where database equals, and then whatever database that we're interested in. So class DB is the database that we're in. So what we want to see is we want to see what the procedure status is for any procedures within the class database. And then we do the semicolon, again, as the delimiter, and then we hit enter. And then from here, we can see what procedures we have. So we have a nasty procedure, and we have a test P procedure. So this shows us our two procedures, shows us our modified time, shows us our created time, gives us a bit of other information. So now, but one of the things you'll see here is that we don't see what the procedure actually does. So we have a name of the procedure. We have who defined it, so who created it, Bob at localhost. We have some time, we have some other information. But let's say we need to see what the hell nasty procedure is. And again, this is one of the big problems. One of the big problems in the real world of IT is simply knowing what the hell something is. Again, naming convention is a big deal, right? Like think about this, like nasty. Nasty tells you nothing. I have no idea what nasty does, right? So again, this is something important to think about. When you're creating procedures, create names that are descriptive. Maybe like inner join parts vendor procedure, something like that. I don't know. But okay, let me say, okay, nasty. I'm not sure how I feel about nasty. So what is this nasty procedure? So in order to see what the nasty procedure is, what we can do is we can do the command show create procedure. So basically what this is saying is show how this procedure was created. And then we type in nasty because that's a procedure that we're interested in. We do semicolon, which is the delimiter, and then we hit return. So from here, we're going to get a whole bunch of stuff, and we got to sort of sort through it. So nasty, only group by, create definer, Bob at localhost. So you get this whole information. Then the important thing is you come down here to the begin. Okay, so the begin, and then what is this procedure? So what you can see here is this procedure is select all from parts, inner join vendors on parts.vendor, vendor equals vendor ID equals vendors.vendor underscore ID. And so this is the SQL statement. If we go and we take a look at that test P that we created, so again, we can do show create procedure test P, that was the other procedure that we created, semicolon as a delimiter. So from here, again, you got to sort through a whole bunch of this. So we have the name, and we have some other information up here for this test P procedure. We look down to begin, and for the test P procedure, we can see it select all from parts, and that's all there is to it. So show create procedure, then whatever procedure the name it is, you type that in, and then that will show you how the procedure was created. From there, if you want to get rid of the procedure, you want to drop it for whatever reason, you can then do drop, and then you do procedure. So you have to tell it what you want to drop. And let's say we want to do test, drop test P, then we do semicolon, then that got dropped. Let's say we want to drop procedure nasty, so we don't want the procedure nasty. Then we do semicolon, and we get no errors. From here, again, we can try to see what procedures we have within this database on the server. So we can do show procedure status where DB equals single quotation mark class DB, or whatever your database name is, close single quotation mark, semicolon as a delimiter, and then you hit enter, and we can see that we now have an empty set. There are no procedures, stored procedures within this particular database on this database server. So that's how you create a procedure. That's how you're able to run a procedure. You just do call whatever the procedure name is. That shows you what procedures are on your database server. Showed you how to see what the procedure actually is, and I showed you how to drop the procedure. And again, the most important thing, the one thing out of all of this that you have to remember is how to set the delimiter back to semicolon. Because remember, if you set the delimiter to something else and you don't set it back to semicolon, you're going to have a bunch of problems. So that's a basic overview of the stored procedures for you. So now you know how to set your delimiter, how to create a stored procedure, how to call a stored procedure, how to see what stored procedures are within a database, how to see what those stored procedures actually do, and then how to drop, basically how to delete the stored procedures. As with all of these things in the MySQL universe, you can get into much more complicated subjects with stored procedures. If you're actually going to be doing stored procedures, I do recommend you go onto Google, you look a little bit more into stored procedures, because again, this can be a whole couple-hour class on its own. I am just giving you a bit of an introduction here to make your life easier. Again, this is one of those things where a lot of new people, they have this idea that they want to type everything out, which is good. When you're new, by all means, type out all your SQL statements. If you have a nasty, long, tedious SQL statement, type that thing out every single time when you're brand new. It'll get you used to typing out the commands. It'll get you used to making sure you're typing in all the things that you think you're typing in. It'll get you used to when you're supposed to use commas and when you're not supposed to use commas, right? Typing out these long SQL statements are really great when you're new and you're learning and you're trying to hard code this information into your head. It really sucks when you're an old timer and you just need an answer. I just need an answer. I don't need to relearn this, right? One of the problems you get into, again, with the command line is, remember, the system will process what you type in. And so if you have a really nasty long SQL statement and you know that there's supposed to be a comma, but for some reason when you hit the comma, it didn't register for some reason, or you know something else, you just fat-fingered it, right? You type in that thing and it errors out. It can be a real pain in the butt. So one of the nice things with these stored procedures is normally when you're using a database, you're going to interact with it more or less the same way every time you go and deal with the database, right? There are going to be certain SQL statements that you're going to use over and 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 over again. So you might as well just create those as a stored procedure, and then you can just simply call the stored procedure without typing everything out. So again, this is one of those things. While you're new, type out the SQL statements every single time. Once you get used to typing out the SQL statements and you feel very comfortable with it, you just need to actually get some work done. And that's where you can create these stored procedures. And then again, all you do is you call the stored procedure and then that whole statement gets shot out. You don't have to worry about fat fingering things or the wrong stuff being in there, because you can write it once, make sure it works properly, and then just continue to use that into the future. But again, with SQL statements, with stored procedures, there actually is a lot more to this. So if you're interested in using stored procedures, definitely go out and do some more research, because you can do some more cool things with it. But this was just a brief introduction for you. And again, don't forget that delimiter. You set that delimiter to $$, and then you do something stupid and you don't set it back. That can cause you problems. So just do remember that. As always, I enjoyed teaching this class and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Apparently, the type of content you just saw is not what Susan W. wants for the future of YouTube. This means that recommendations by YouTube to this channel have dropped massively and views are becoming comically small. I hate to ask. I used to say I would never ask, but if you could subscribe, like, comment, and most importantly, share the videos that you appreciate, that may help slow the death of this channel. Do remember that if anything at all happens to this channel, you can go to EliTheComputerGuy.com to view the content and access information not available on YouTube.